Thanksgiving used to feel like a pause. A day that tasted like cinnamon and forgiveness, where we all pretended we were a little softer than we were. The air always smelled like butter and half-burnt pie crust, and for a few hours we became the version of ourselves that existed only for photographs. Smiling, reaching, laughing, the kind of family that could make strangers believe we loved without conditions. And maybe once, we did, but this year the room felt different, quieter, colder, like everyone was pretending not to hear the same thing cracking between us. I was standing by the counter, helping dish out mashed potatoes when she said it, her voice sharp enough to slice through the air, through the pretend, through me. "Stop asking for money," she said, like it was a joke. Like I'd been begging her for something. Everyone laughed. That nervous kind of laugh that fills the room when someone says something true that shouldn't have been said out loud. My hand froze, the spoon still heavy with potatoes. I didn't say anything at first, I just smiled, that small, polite smile people wear when they've been humiliated publicly and need a second to collect their dignity before it slides off their face. My heart was loud though, so loud I was sure everyone could hear it thudding against the silence that followed. "Stop asking for money." If I hadn't known the exact number, maybe it wouldn't have hurt so much. If 52,840, 2 months of making payments I could barely afford, just to keep her credit score alive. The number that lived rent-free in my head while she booked flights, bought purses and posted captions about gratitude. Gratitude. The irony burned. She was sitting at the head of the table, the seat she always claimed even when Mom said it didn't matter where we sat. She never outgrew the need to feel in control. That's the thing about family. Sometimes the roles you were assigned as kids become the cages you still live in as adults. She was the golden one, the one who could make chaos look charming. And I was the one who fixed it all quietly, the one who never told anyone how heavy it got. I used to think love was measured by sacrifice. That if you gave enough, eventually people would notice. That one day, they'd look at you and see all the ways you had held them up when they were falling apart. But sometimes people get too comfortable leaning. They forget that your shoulders get tired too. I never meant to be her safety net. It started small, a late payment here, and I'll pay you back next month there. She was my sister, the person who braided my hair before school, the one who told me I could be anything. So when she called crying about losing her job, I didn't even hesitate. I told her I'd handle it. Because that's what you do when family says they need help. You don't ask when or how much. You just fix it, and I did. Every late fee, every overdraft, every ridiculous charge she swore was a necessity. I was the one who sat up at night recalculating my rent, moving money from groceries to minimum payments, convincing myself it was temporary. Except it wasn't, because she got comfortable, because I made it easy. I remember the day I realized I wasn't saving her anymore. I was enabling her. It was the day I found out she'd booked a trip to Cabo. Paid in full. Posted a story with a drink in her hand. Laughing like she hadn't just called me 3 days ago saying she couldn't make her credit card payment. I stared at the photo until the screen dimmed, trying to understand how she could look so happy, while I was sitting at my desk eating instant noodles, pretending I wasn't drowning. But you can't teach people accountability by carrying their consequences for them. I learned that too late. Still, I never told anyone, not Mom, not Dad. I didn't want her to look bad. I kept making the payments in silence. Every time I saw her, I convinced myself it was fine. That one day, she'd realize, that she'd say thank you, that she'd mean it. But Thanksgiving came and all I got was, "Stop asking for money." I wanted to laugh. I wanted to tell everyone that the only reason she could afford to sit there with that smug little smile, with her gold necklace and her perfect hair, was because I had been her invisible bank for years. But I didn't. I swallowed it, like always, because calling it out wouldn't make it better. It would just make me the problem. The bitter one, the dramatic one, the sister who couldn't just let it go. So instead, I passed the potatoes, sat down and pretended my appetite hadn't left the room with my dignity. It's strange how silence becomes a habit. You start swallowing little pieces of yourself to keep the peace until you don't even notice the emptiness anymore. You stop asking for acknowledgement. You stop hoping for fairness. You start believing maybe you deserve to be the one who gives and never gets. But I think that night something inside me broke. Not loudly, quietly, like a whisper you almost don't catch, the kind that says, "You don't have to keep proving your love like this." After dinner, I drove home without music. Just the sound of the road and the echo of her words replaying in my head. Stop asking for money. The irony of being accused of something you've never done, it sticks to your bones. I had never asked her for anything, not once, not money, not favors, not gratitude. I just wanted her to be decent, to be kind. But kindness doesn't live in everyone the same way. I sat in my car in the driveway for a long time, my hands gripping the steering wheel like it was the only thing keeping me from falling apart. I thought about the years I'd spent bailing her out. The birthdays I'd skipped celebrating because I couldn't afford a gift for myself. The extra shifts, the side jobs, the sleepless nights. I thought about every time she called me lucky for having my life together, not realizing she was part of the reason I could never enjoy it. There's a kind of exhaustion that doesn't show on your face, the kind that builds slowly from constantly being the reliable one, the responsible one, the one who fixes, who forgives, who pays, who stays. And that kind of exhaustion doesn't need rest, it needs release. So I did something I'd never done before. I logged into the account, the one I'd been paying on her behalf, and I made one final payment, the last one. My hands were shaking as I pressed confirm, not because I was angry, but because I finally understood something. Freedom isn't always about walking away from people. Sometimes it's about no longer letting them walk all over you. I didn't text her. I didn't tell her, I just stopped. For weeks after, my phone stayed quiet, no calls, no messages, no requests. It was strange, peaceful even. The quiet felt new, heavy but clean. Like a house after you've taken out all the clutter and can finally hear your own thoughts again. And then one night, she called. Crying, of course. Something about her card being declined. About how she didn't understand why. I listened, the way I always did. But this time I didn't fix it. I told her maybe she should call the bank. The silence on the other end of the line was colder than anything I'd ever heard from her. So you're just gonna let me deal with it? She asked. And I wanted to laugh again. Because wasn't that what she'd been telling me all along? Stop asking for money. It's funny how people teach you lessons they never intended to. She hung up angry. I sat there shaking, but not from guilt, from the unfamiliar feeling of choosing myself. It felt both terrifying and holy. The next morning I made coffee and didn't check my messages. I didn't calculate payments. I didn't scroll her page. I just sat there with the quiet hum of freedom in my chest. It felt like oxygen. A few days later, Mom called. She asked why my sister was saying I'd cut her off. I told her I didn't cut anyone off. I just stopped holding on. There's a difference. Mom didn't get it. Maybe she never would. Parents have a way of protecting the child who shouts the loudest. And my sister, she'd been shouting since birth. For the first time in years, I didn't try to defend myself. I didn't explain. I just said, I think I've done enough. And then that was it. It's strange. The relief that comes when you stop explaining your pain to people who caused it. You realize how much energy you've been wasting, trying to make them understand something they're not ready to see. I started to notice small changes in myself after that. I slept better, I smiled more. The weight in my chest started to lift inch by inch. I even caught myself humming in the kitchen one morning. Something I hadn't done in years. And yet, there was still this ache. Not from missing her, but from realizing how much I had loved someone who would never have done the same for me. That's the quiet grief no one talks about. Mourning the version of someone you invented in your head. I used to believe that if I kept giving, she'd become the sister I always hoped she'd be. But people don't transform through your generosity. They evolve through their own humility. And she never wanted to look in that mirror. I think what hurt the most wasn't her words, but the realization that they came from a place of truth, her truth. She really believed I was asking for something. Because in her world, love always had a price tag. In mine, it didn't, but I've learned that being good doesn't mean being used. Being generous doesn't mean being blind. And love, real love, doesn't drain you dry just to keep someone else full. Sometimes, you have to accept that family isn't always built on fairness, it's built on habit, on shared history, on the illusion that blood means bond. But blood doesn't guarantee empathy, it doesn't guarantee gratitude. When I finally looked at her without the weight of obligation, I saw her for who she was. Not the sister I'd been protecting, but the woman who never learned to appreciate protection, and maybe that's not her fault. Maybe we were just raised in a house where apologies were whispered but blame was loud. Where helping meant hiding how tired you were. Still, I don't hate her. I can't, because part of me understands her. The part that once believed love was transactional. That affection was earned through proving. That worth was measured by what you could give away. But I'm done proving. I'm done fixing. I'm done being the quiet hero in a story where no one even remembers my name. Thanksgiving will come again. And she'll probably still sit at the head of the table, still wearing her smile like armor. Maybe she'll make another joke, maybe she won't. Maybe she'll pretend nothing happened, I don't know. But I do know this. I won't be sitting there waiting for her to notice what I've done for her. Because that version of me, the one who needed acknowledgement, doesn't live here anymore. I've started noticing small joys again. Like how the morning light hits my coffee cup. The sound of my own laughter echoing through a room that used to feel too quiet. The peace that comes when your phone isn't buzzing with other people's emergencies. It's not loud or dramatic, it's simple, soft, mine. And maybe that's what healing really is. Not grand gestures or closure speeches, but learning to be okay without the apology. The debt is gone now. The money, the years, the energy, all of it. I don't regret paying it. Because it taught me the most expensive lesson of all. The price of peace is often paid in letting go. Sometimes I wonder if she'll ever realize. If she'll look at her cleared balance one day and remember that it was me. That I was the reason her world didn't collapse when it should have. But then I remember. That's not my responsibility anymore. I used to think love meant staying until you were empty. Now I know it means leaving before you forget who you are. And maybe one day, when she's sitting at another table, telling another story, she'll think of me. Maybe she'll feel a flicker of shame, maybe she won't. But either way I'll be okay. Because I finally stopped living like I owed her something. Because I finally stopped mistaking guilt for love. Because I finally stopped asking for permission to keep my peace. Healing didn't come when she said sorry. She still hasn't. Healing came when I realized I didn't need her to. When I stopped sitting at tables where kindness wasn't served. Healing began when I realized my worth wasn't in what I gave, but in what I stopped giving. For a long time, I thought love was a transaction. Not in the cold, greedy way people talk about money, but in the quiet, emotional way people talk about sacrifice. Give more, love harder, forgive faster, stay longer. I thought being valuable meant being available. I thought being good meant being needed. Every time someone said they didn't know what they'd do without me, it felt like proof that I mattered. And that was enough for a while. To matter, even if it meant being drained. I gave because I wanted to be seen. Because I wanted to be chosen. Because I wanted to be safe in relationships that made me feel disposable. I gave time, attention, forgiveness, patience, money, pieces of myself that took years to build. I gave until giving became my personality. Until no, felt like betrayal. Until people stopped thanking me because they started expecting me. And I didn't even blame them. Because when you teach people that your love comes without limits, they will believe you. They will take without guilt. They will accept your help, your empathy, your time, and call it normal. You can't fault them for believing what you keep showing them. But one day, I woke up and realized I couldn't recognize myself in the mirror anymore. Not because I looked different, but because I felt hollow. The kind of empty that doesn't come from loss, but from overextending yourself into everyone else's chaos. I had become a background character in other people's stories. The dependable one, the understanding one, the fixer, the friend who never says no, the sister who always shows up, the employee who never complains. And in being everything for everyone, I had forgotten how to be someone for myself. I used to pride myself on being strong, on being the person who could handle anything. But I think strength gets twisted sometimes. We confuse endurance with worth. We think the more we can handle, the more valuable we are. We wear exhaustion like a medal. We brag about how little we need, how much we give, how forgiving we are. But it's not strength if it keeps you small. It's not grace if it erases you. Healing didn't start when I decided to give more of myself. It started when I realized I had nothing left to give. That was the breaking point, the quiet collapse that no one saw. When you give past your capacity, your body will tell you before your heart does. It shows up in the tension in your chest, the headaches that don't go away, the feeling of dread before saying yes. It shows up in the moments you start resenting the people you love, not because you hate them, but because you hate who you become around them. Overextended, overlooked, overused. The truth is, I thought giving endlessly made me good. But it made me invisible, because people stop looking closely at what they always assume will be there. They stop saying thank you. They stop checking in. They stop asking how you are, because they already know your answer. I'm fine. But fine isn't real. Fine is what you say when you've learned that honesty makes people uncomfortable. Fine is what you say when you're holding everything together with shaking hands and a quiet smile. So I started to experiment with something that terrified me: withholding. Not out of cruelty, but out of self-preservation. I said no once. Just once. To something small it felt foreign, like wearing a stranger's voice. My stomach twisted with guilt, waiting for someone to be disappointed in me. But instead, something strange happened. The world didn't collapse, the sun still rose. The person I said no to found another way. And I realized how much of my exhaustion came from believing I was irreplaceable in other people's chaos. When I stopped giving without thought, I started noticing how people reacted. Some respected it, some resented it. The ones who stayed quiet and kind when I said no, those were the ones who saw me as human. The ones who guilt-tripped, who accused, who withdrew, those were the ones who saw me as a resource. It hurt to learn the difference. But it was the kind of hurt that leads to clarity. I started seeing patterns. The friends who only called when they needed comfort, not connection. The family who only reached out when they needed help, not to check in. The people who praised my giving spirit but never offered to refill it. I had surrounded myself with consumers, not companions. And I had done it because being needed felt safer than being loved. There's a loneliness that lives inside people who overgive. It's quiet, like a hum beneath everything. You can be surrounded by people, even adored, and still feel unseen. Because what they love isn't you. It's what you do for them. That's the hardest truth to swallow. That sometimes the version of you people love most is the one that depletes you the fastest. I started to learn what real giving looked like. The kind that comes from abundance, not obligation. It's softer, slower, quieter. It doesn't need recognition. It doesn't come from guilt. It doesn't leave you empty. Real generosity is rooted in choice, not compulsion. It's when you give because you want to, not because you're afraid of what happens if you don't. And to find that version of giving, I had to stop. Completely. I had to sit in the discomfort of not being the rescuer. I had to let people solve their own problems. I had to resist the urge to fix, to soften, to absorb. It felt selfish at first, every boundary does. But slowly, I began to realize that the version of me who always said yes wasn't selfless. She was scared. Scared that if she stopped giving, she'd stop being loved. That fear ran deep. It was the voice of every moment I'd been taught that my value came from usefulness. From being easy, accommodating, reliable. It was the conditioning that told me saying no meant rejection. That being tired meant weakness. That taking care of myself was indulgent. But healing has a funny way of stripping you down to the truth. It doesn't happen all at once. It happens in small, defiant acts of self-respect. It happens the first time you don't pick up the phone when someone calls to unload on you. It happens when you stop offering to pay, when you stop volunteering, when you stop apologizing for being unavailable. It happens when you start resting without guilt, when you start choosing yourself without explanation. Every time I stopped giving out of fear, I reclaimed a little piece of myself. The version of me that existed before I learned that love was conditional. Before I learned that worth was measured in usefulness. Before I learned that my presence only mattered when it benefited someone else. The more I stopped, the more I started to feel full again. I started enjoying silence. I started trusting that I didn't have to earn my peace. I started believing that rest didn't need justification. That stillness didn't mean laziness. That saying no didn't mean I was unkind. It meant I was human. People noticed the shift. Some pulled closer, curious. Others drifted away, offended. And for the first time, I didn't chase them. Because I realized that the people who leave when you stop giving were never staying for you. They were staying for the benefit. And when the benefit ended, so did their affection. That kind of clarity hurts, but it also cleanses. I used to wonder why I was always so tired. Why I couldn't seem to rest even when I had time. But rest isn't just physical, it's emotional. And you can't rest in relationships that require you to perform. You can't heal in spaces that only value your utility. You can't grow in soil that only expects you to give nutrients but never receives yours. When I stopped giving endlessly, I started noticing what I truly had to offer. I realized my worth wasn't in my sacrifices, it was in my spirit. It was in my honesty, my warmth, my laughter, my ability to see beauty in small things. It was in the way I could sit in silence with someone and make them feel safe without fixing anything. Those things didn't require depletion, they just required authenticity. I used to think love was about proving. Now I know it's about presence. I used to think boundaries built distance. Now I know they build respect. I used to think saying no closed doors. Now I know it opens the right ones. There's something sacred about finally being at peace with not being everything for everyone. About realizing that love doesn't mean losing yourself to keep others whole. That real connection doesn't ask you to shrink. That peace isn't found in constant giving. It's found in balanced exchange. I used to walk into rooms already calculating what I could offer. Now I walk in asking myself how I feel there. That's the difference between seeking approval and protecting peace. I stopped giving my explanations to people committed to misunderstanding me. I stopped giving my time to conversations that went nowhere. I stopped giving my forgiveness to people who mistook it for weakness. I stopped giving my empathy to people who used it as a cushion for their cruelty, and slowly I started giving to myself, attention, compassion, grace, rest, space to grow without guilt. The kind of giving that nourishes instead of depletes. The kind that reminds you that you are both the giver and the gift. Healing didn't look like revenge. It didn't look like confrontation. It looked like quiet withdrawal, not from people, but from patterns. It looked like learning to let silence answer what used to trigger explanations. It looked like learning to be okay with people thinking you've changed. Because you have. I stopped giving what cost me peace. I stopped giving what came from fear. I stopped giving to be chosen. And in doing so, I finally chose myself. Healing began when I realized my worth wasn't in what I gave, but in what I stopped giving.